So, Screen Rant did an article, and this article was sent to me by Frank Hill. And they basically talked about how, the comic books, basically the Sonic comics under the Archie license, took a lot of influence from the Sonic SatAM series, mostly after the show was canceled. But that as they took that influence and took elements from the Sonic SatAM series and actually expanded on them and followed through on them, in certain places and in ways, like with Robotnik finding out where Knothole is and stuff, and the roboticizer situation, stuff like that. Even though they, according to Screen Rant, took those elements and followed through on them, expanded on them, in the long run, they also made the stories more complex. They made the characters and the stories more complex. They made them a little bit more darker and more mature than what we had seen before. And and Screen Rant, they're kind of right on that, because when you go back and listen to what Ken Penders had to say in his interview with Midnight's Edge last year, and I do apologize, it's early. It's about 7:19 in the morning Pacific time. But like I said, when you listen to what Ken Penders had to say in his interview with Midnight's Edge last year, it does kind of coincide somewhat with what Screen Rant is pointing out here. Because basically after the show, the animated series was canceled, they basically, I guess you could say, had to, to keep the comic relevant, if you will, and selling, off the newsstands, being a hot seller off the newsstands, they had to change it. They had to change it to a point that it felt like, essentially later on as time went on, and you start to noticeably see those changes, it felt like you were reading an episode right off the storyboards for Sonic SatAM. That's what it felt like. That's what it felt like as time went on. You started noticing those changes, and it felt like you were reading an episode of Sonic SatAM in your hands, with every issue. And Ken basically said in his interview that the changes really started to, begin, or really started to take hold, if you will, with issue 17, because between issues 1 and 17, it was still kind of that hybrid of, here's the adventure setting and humor, but you have the Sonic SatAM characters to go along with it. But with the backup stories of 17 and 18 and even 19, you started to see more of a SatAM-like tone taking effect, because now, fans wanted to get the SatAM fix, but they didn't know where to get it from, and Penders and those working with him made the decision to bring that SatAM fix over to the comics with whatever information they could get from those that worked on the show. And that's what happened. And as time went on, people like Ken, Carl, Mike, Ian, Ivan, Elia, all of them, basically built upon, that evolution, that fact, that very moment in day, I should say, as I should put it, of when the show, not the show, but the comics started to grow up, if you will. I guess you could say, in a way, that the show being canceled forced the comic to grow up, basically start to mature, if you will, go through its puberty stage, if you will. Excuse me there. But yeah, basically that's kind of what happened. And Screen Rant basically pointed that out. They pointed that out along with, Kim Penders pointed it out in his interview last year with Midnight's Edge, that because of that, the comic was forced to, take it up a notch and basically put on its, big boy pants, if you will, and, start getting in line of, hey, if you're going to survive here, you got to basically evolve, you got to grow. And that's exactly what happened. And credit goes to those that worked on the series, whether you liked them or you didn't, because they knew that if the comic was going to still remain a hit, which it was, it had to grow up along with its fans, because the fans were growing up as well. And to me, it was because of this decision to make it more SatAM inspired, with the stories and the characters and everything, that to me, that's what made the comic a big hit. It made it a bigger hit than it normally was, because now as I said earlier, it felt like you were reading an issue, or not an issue, you were reading an episode of Sonic SatAM in an issue of the comic. And that's what fans had been wanting. They wanted something that was going to give them a SatAM fix. And when they would read an issue as that time went on, they started noticing that they were getting the SatAM fix in the comic. That the comic was no longer this hybrid, or not hybrid, but this hybrid amalgamation of both Adventures and SatAM, that it was strictly just SatAM. And it felt natural, it felt right. Now, true, after a while, the comic did start to evolve even more so, especially after Endgame. Endgame was basically like, the first essential reboot or retcon, if you will, that was placed into the comic, even though it wasn't noticeable, because now you started to get more into game territory. Not as much as what Ian had put in later on, but you started noticing some more game elements and influences coming in. And as time went on, percolating into the comic more so than it ever has. You started, because now all of a sudden you get adaptations of Sonic Adventure, you get adaptations, even if they're just, short adaptations, if you will, you get adaptations of Sonic Adventure 2, you're getting these Another Time, Another Place adaptations for like, generations, colors, you name it. You started to see all this start to percolate within as time went on, and in a way, it kind of worked. It may have not made sense in some cases, but it kind of worked. And in the end, it allowed the comic to go on to become the longest running licensed comic based on anything in history. It's in the Guinness Book of World Records, if you will, if you want proof of that. And again, when Screen Rant says that the stories got more complicated, darker, and mature, as well as the characters, being the same way, there are great examples of that. Endgame's a good example. The Sonic Adventure adaptation's a good example. Iron Dominion's a good example. As crazy as this may sound coming from me, in a way, the Mecha Sally, is unnecessary and controversial as it was, the Mecha Sally arc, is a good example. There are good elements. Even after the soft retcon and reboot, there are some good examples there, like Spark of Life. The entire Sonic Unleashed East story arc, if you will, adaptation, if you will. That's a good example. The conclusion of that, Panic in the Sky, is a good example. All these things are good examples of the complexity that Screen Rant brought up, that the comic had gotten into, with its stories and its characters. But in a way, it helped the comic, basically, as I put it, to grow up, to mature and grow up along with its audience. Because if it would have remained somewhat stagnant as it was, it wouldn't have become the longest reigning comic in history. It wouldn't even lasted after 75. It would have been done. If it hit 100, that'd be great, but then that would be it. But thankfully, like I said, whether you like the people or you don't, the people behind the series realize that if this comic's going to continue being a hit, selling off the newsstands as quickly as it was, becoming more, getting more mail-in subscriptions to the office for 6 months to 12 months to 24 months subscriptions, if they knew, if they wanted that, I should say, to keep going, they knew they had to basically, make the comic evolve and grow. And that's what happened. So when you really think about it, as crazy as this sounds, when the SatAM cartoon was canceled, it, in a way, forced, the comic itself to grow up. It forced it to grow up and become the complex, mature, darker toned, SatAM inspired comic that went on to be the longest reigning licensed comic video game licensed comic in history. Because of that moment. And this is why, when you look at someone like, Team Season, that's SEA numeral 3ON, or Season Animated, when you see what they're trying to do by kind of bringing the third season, or basically whatever variation of the third season, to animated life to give it a proper conclusion, closure, if you will, it shows you the impact that the cartoon had. Even for the two official seasons it has, it shows you the impact that it had. Because it basically forced, in a way, a comic that probably would have just lasted to about maybe issue 25, if not issue 50 at the most, to grow up, evolve, and because of that, forcing, it went on to become basically the most successful video game licensed comic in history. And basically right now, no one can hold that distinction. Not Mario, not Mega Man, not Banjo-Kazooie, not Crash, not Ratchet or Clank, nobody. Sonic is the one, Sonic, Sally, and all of them are the ones that hold that distinction. Because the writers behind the book had to were basically forced to make the book grow up and evolve and mature and become what it is that it became, what Screen Rant basically says it became. So anyway, I just wanted to come out and talk about that. I will try to provide a link down below to the article that Frank Heel sent me. I do apologize if it sounded like I rambled and went off a little bit. It's early. It's about 7:30 in the morning Pacific time on this Tuesday, August 10th. Trying to do this while my mom is still asleep. Opportunity, knocking. Might as well answer it when I can. But let me know what your thoughts are. Comment down below as well as in the live chat during the premiere. Like the video. What are your thoughts on what I had to say? Again, link to the article will be provided in the description, and I will talk to you all later.